The phone rang at 3:23 a.m. Julian Ashcroft's heart hammered in his chest as he fumbled to answer, still groggy from sleep. The voice on the other end was cold, urgent, and direct. "Mr. Ashcroft, we need you here immediately. Your daughter Lucy is in critical condition." A churning wave of disbelief crashed over him. Daughter? Lucy? He had no children. He was certain of that. 2 years ago, he had walked away from Nevaeh, leaving their life, their home, and any hope of a family behind. But now, this. A child he never knew existed, in desperate need of his help. The words didn't seem to make sense, but the urgency in the doctor's voice left no room for doubt. Lucy was his, and she was dying. Julian's pulse raced. 2 years ago, he had left Nevaeh in a rush, without a second thought, consumed by ambition and the influence of his controlling mother. He hadn't even known she was pregnant. Now his world was turning upside down as the reality of his past decisions began to sink in. A child he never knew existed, his flesh and blood, was on the brink of death, and he was being called to save her. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I've missed you all so much. It's been a tough ride with some technical issues, but by God's grace, we're getting everything back on track. Thank you for sticking with me. Your support means everything. Before we begin, I want to say a little prayer over everyone watching, especially the women. To the women, may God strengthen you, comfort you, and fill your heart with peace and favor. To the men, may God guide you, bless your efforts, and give you wisdom in all you do. And may God's protection rest on every single one of you. Amen. If you're ready for today's story, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My USA and UK family, I see you. And please watch till the end, because tomorrow I'll be dropping another story you wouldn't want to miss. Now, let's get into the story. He hung up the phone, his mind spinning. This wasn't a simple call to action. It was a reckoning. The consequences of his choices were now staring him in the face, and there was no way to undo the damage that had been done. How could he have left? How could he have abandoned Nevaeh and, unknowingly, their daughter, without a second thought? And how could he fix this now? If you're wondering how this all started, let me take you back. It feels like a lifetime ago when everything had felt right. When Julian and Nevaeh had laughed together over breakfast, planning out their future, dreaming of a family. In those early days, their connection had been magnetic, effortless. Nevaeh's laugh had been the thing that anchored him, a melody that made him feel like the world could fall apart around them and nothing could tear them apart. She was smart, driven, passionate about everything she touched. He admired her fiercely, maybe even more than he ever let on. He'd thought they were invincible, the kind of couple you read about in stories or saw on magazine covers. Perfect. But somewhere along the way, things started to shift. The subtle cracks were easy to ignore at first, until they couldn't be. It started with small things. Nevaeh wanting to spend more time together, pushing to take weekends off. She spoke more about settling down, about having children. It was as if she could feel something in the air, an unspoken longing for something bigger than their busy lives. And Julian had wanted something different. He wanted more business, more success, more expansion, more control over the life he'd worked so hard to build. Nevaeh's dream of a family clashed with his own, a vision of unending growth that didn't include quiet weekends in suburban kitchens. But it wasn't just that. The doubts came not from her, but from his mother, Evelyn. Evelyn had always been a force in his life, her voice louder than any other. She'd taught him the ropes of the business world, made him believe that every decision must be calculated, and every risk must be precise. But when Nevaeh started to talk more about having children, something changed. Evelyn began to plant seeds of doubt. "You don't need a woman like that, Julian," she had said one evening, her voice cool and controlled. She's too caught up in this fantasy of family. She can't give you what you really need. She doesn't even understand your vision." And Julian had listened. He hadn't questioned her judgment. He believed Evelyn, as he had always done. "Do you really think she's capable of putting your career first? Do you really think she'll understand what it takes to run this business? The sacrifices you'll have to make? She'll expect you to be a father, to be home. Do you really want to be tied down by that?" It was a whisper of a voice, but it was all it took. Evelyn's words dug deep into Julian's mind, twisting his perception. She painted Nevaeh as selfish, naive, too focused on a dream of family that wasn't practical. The decision to leave was not made in a moment of anger, nor was it a sudden snap. It had been slow and methodical, the culmination of weeks, months of seeds planted by Evelyn's manipulation. Julian convinced himself that Nevaeh would never understand his ambitions. And when he realized she was pregnant, that fear escalated. Nevaeh had been excited when she told him. She had looked at him with those wide eyes, her smile bright with the hope of a future they could build together, a future that included children. And Julian? He froze. Panic set in. A child? With Nevaeh? It wasn't that he didn't want kids, but the timing felt wrong. He hadn't planned for this. Not yet. Not when his empire was only beginning to take off. He couldn't afford to lose focus. But instead of confronting his fears, Julian chose to walk away, to close the door without ever really opening it. He told himself it was for the best. For her. For him. For everything he was working toward. But deep down, he knew it was a lie. The night Julian left, he didn't say a word. There was no grand confrontation, no heated argument. Nevaeh had been asleep when he packed his things. The house was silent except for the sound of his shoes clicking across the marble floors. His heart had been heavy, his mind racing, but he knew there was no turning back. The decision had been made, and the weight of it crushed him. He opened the drawer where Nevaeh kept their divorce papers, signed them without looking back. An envelope, carefully folded, rested on the counter, a cold finality. He placed it there without a word, knowing she would find it in the morning. He didn't wait for her to wake up, to question him, to beg for answers. Julian didn't even give her that much. He simply walked away from the life they had built together, from the woman who had once been everything to him, and from the child he didn't even know existed. As Julian sat in the back of the car, speeding toward San Diego, the guilt gnawed at him, deeper than he ever thought possible. How had it all come to this? He had convinced himself it was the right thing to do, but now it was clear. He had destroyed everything he once cherished. Nevaeh, yes, but also the child. His child. His flesh and blood. How could he have been so blind? How could he have left without even knowing she was pregnant? The thought was suffocating. For the first time in years, Julian wondered whether he had ever really known Nevaeh, and even more crushing, whether he had ever really known himself. Please, if you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. The weight of his past decisions was heavy, and the road to redemption felt impossibly far. But he had no choice. There was no other option. He had to try to make things right. He just didn't know how. But he would try. For Lucy, and maybe, just maybe, for Nevaeh too. When Julian walked out, Nevaeh's world crumbled. It wasn't just the loss of her husband. It was the loss of the future she had envisioned. But Nevaeh wasn't the type to stay down for long. The pain of betrayal cut deep. But it didn't break her. She threw herself into work, picking up shifts at a local grocery store in San Diego. It wasn't glamorous. She stacked shelves, worked the cash register, did whatever she could to make ends meet. But it gave her something to focus on, something to distract her from the constant ache in her chest. The world had moved on without her, and she had no choice but to do the same. By day, Nevaeh worked tirelessly. By night, she found solace in the small apartment she had rented. It was nothing like the home she had shared with Julian. The kitchen, once filled with laughter and dreams of a future, now sat empty, save for the remnants of a life that felt like a distant memory. She never reached out to him, not once. The thought of calling him, begging him to come back, never crossed her mind. Julian had made his choice, and Nevaeh wasn't about to chase a man who had walked away without a second glance. But there was something she hadn't anticipated, the life growing inside her. The news hit her like a freight train, pregnant, with Julian's child. The shock nearly shattered her. How could this happen? How could she be carrying a child when the man she loved, the father of her baby, was gone? But the moment the doctor confirmed the pregnancy, something inside her shifted. She had no one to depend on but herself. Nevaeh had been alone before, and now she would be alone again. But this time, she had to be strong for the child she was bringing into the world. When Lucy was born, Nevaeh's heart swelled with a love so pure, it almost hurt. She was everything, her reason for surviving, her reason for breathing. The loneliness, the fear, the doubt, everything melted away when she held her daughter in her arms. She had no idea how she was going to do it, how she was going to raise Lucy on her own. But Nevaeh was nothing if not resilient. She would figure it out. She had to. I'm telling you, there's more to this story than just love and heartbreak. If you want to hear more real stories about overcoming obstacles, don't miss out. Subscribe now and be part of this journey. The sound of screeching tires echoed through the rain-slicked streets of San Diego, the crash deafening as Nevaeh's car was hit from the side, spinning violently before it slammed into a tree. The impact left her unconscious, blood staining the seat beneath her. She was rushed to Mercy Hospital, her condition critical, with multiple fractures and internal injuries. Lucy, in the back seat, had been thrown forward on impact. She was alive, but barely. The phone rang, breaking the silence of the sterile hospital hallway. Julian Ashcroft stood motionless in the lobby of his penthouse, the early morning light barely creeping in through the windows. His heart skipped a beat when the number flashed on his screen. "Mr. Ashcroft?" The voice on the other end was strained. "This is Dr. Peters from Mercy Hospital in San Diego. We need you to come immediately. Your daughter, Lucy, she's in critical condition. We have no other emergency contacts on file. You're the next of kin." His stomach twisted. Daughter? He barely processed the word before the rest of the message sank in. Lucy, his daughter. He never knew she existed until a few hours ago, but now she needed him. His mind raced, the weight of what he had left behind crashing down on him like a freight train. Without another word, he grabbed his coat and headed to the airport. Julian arrived at Mercy Hospital, a place that should have been familiar in some distant, alternative life, one where he hadn't made the devastating decision to leave Nevaeh behind. His breath caught in his throat as he was led to the pediatric wing, where a doctor greeted him with somber eyes. "Mr. Ashcroft," Dr. Peters began, "your daughter's condition is severe. She's been through a lot. We're doing everything we can." He stepped into the room, his heart sinking as he saw Lucy lying there, pale and fragile, connected to machines that beeped rhythmically. Her tiny face was bruised, but there was a strength in her even now. He could see it, even through the pain. "The bone marrow transplant is her only chance, Mr. Ashcroft," the doctor continued. "We've run tests, and Lucy's blood type matches yours. You're her biological father, and only you can save her." Julian stared at his daughter, a child he never knew he had. The room seemed to spin around him as guilt consumed him. He couldn't undo the damage he'd caused. How could he fix this? How could he make up for years of neglect when all she needed was him now? He'd never wanted to be a father. Not like this, not in the middle of a crisis, but there was no denying it now. He had a responsibility, and whether he was ready or not, it was time to step up. Julian stood by the window in the sterile hospital room, his eyes fixed on Lucy's fragile form. The hum of the machines was the only sound in the room, and it seemed deafening to him. Every few seconds, his gaze flicked from the girl who might be his daughter to the woman lying unconscious in the bed next to her. Nevaeh. She had been through so much, and now here she was, fighting for her life in the same way she had fought for Lucy every day since Julian had left. A knot tightened in Julian's chest. He thought he could leave behind the consequences of his choices, but here they were, staring him in the face. His pulse quickened as the realization hit him. Nevaeh had done it all on her own. She had survived, fought, and thrived without him. He had abandoned her, and she had carried the burden alone, never once asking him to come back, never once telling him what it would cost her. As he stood there, watching her sleep, he recalled the moments before he walked out on her. Nevaeh had always been strong, stronger than him, stronger than he ever gave her credit for. She hadn't begged him to stay when he made the decision to leave. She had simply let him go, holding on to the life she'd built, no matter how painful. He couldn't help but think about all the times she had quietly supported him, even when he didn't deserve it. She had been there, holding everything together, carrying a child she didn't even know was his, all of it, alone. He had abandoned her, and now he was being given a chance to make it right, if he could bring himself to act. But could he? Was it even his place to step in now, after all this time? He didn't deserve the chance to be a father. He didn't deserve to fix what he had broken. Yet, staring at Lucy, at the child who was his blood, his flesh, he realized he couldn't turn his back on her. Not when she was fighting for her life. With a deep breath, Julian made his decision. He would provide the bone marrow. No matter what happened with Nevaeh, he would save his daughter. Every story needs a turning point, and we're just getting started. If you want to see how this one unfolds, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Julian stepped into the dimly lit hospital room, his heart hammering against his chest. He had prepared himself for this moment, mentally, at least, but standing in the doorway, looking at Lucy for the first time, was nothing like he imagined. Her tiny body lay still, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the rhythmic sound of her labored breaths. A delicate hand rested on the edge of the blanket, her skin pale against the white sheets. Julian's eyes traced the curve of her face, the small shape of her nose, the way her lips curled just slightly, and for a split second, it was as if Nevaeh was lying there instead. The resemblance was undeniable. He could see Nevaeh in her, her stubborn jawline, her strong features. Lucy had her mother's fire, even in the fragile state she was in now. His stomach tightened as a flood of regret washed over him. How had he missed this? All the moments he'd abandoned, all the choices that had led him here, crashing down in this sterile room. He had walked away from both of them, never knowing what he was leaving behind. A child, his child, fighting for her life. The guilt twisted in Julian's gut like a knot that wouldn't loosen. What had he missed? What could have been? If he hadn't listened to his mother's manipulative words, if he hadn't been so consumed by his ambition, maybe he would have been here from the start. He would have been there for Nevaeh, for Lucy. Instead, he was standing at the threshold of their lives, trying to piece together a broken past that could never be fixed. The sound of a door opening snapped him out of his reverie. He looked up at the doctor, who stepped forward with a file in hand. "We've reviewed the tests," the doctor said, his voice calm but urgent. "The bone marrow transplant is the only chance she has." Julian's eyes locked onto Lucy's small form once again. He knew what he had to do. Without hesitation, he nodded. "Do it," he said, his voice steady. There was no turning back now. There was still hope, but it was a fragile one. The reality of the situation hit him hard. He wasn't sure if it was too late, but he knew that this was the only chance he had to be the father Lucy deserved. Hope hung in the air, fragile and fleeting, but for the first time in 2 years, Julian allowed himself to believe in it. Nevaeh's eyes fluttered open, the sterile white light above blinding her for a moment. Her head felt heavy, like the weight of the world was pressing down on her skull. The soft hum of machines, the beeping, the faint smell of antiseptic. Everything felt distant and unreal, as if she were trapped between two worlds. Her body ached, every part of her reminding her that something had gone terribly wrong. She tried to move, but the pain shot through her like electricity. A groan escaped her lips, her chest tightening as confusion clouded her mind. Then, she saw him. Standing in the corner of the room, looking out the window, was Julian. Her heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. What is he doing here? For a long moment, neither of them moved. Her gaze locked onto his, and the years of pain, the abandonment, the heartbreak came flooding back. Every cruel word, every empty night when he wasn't there, every piece of herself she had given him. Gone. And now, here he was, standing in front of her after everything. Nevaeh struggled to sit up, the anger bubbling up from deep within. It was impossible to ignore. The way he had left her, the lies he had believed, the promises he had broken. The man she once loved was standing before her, and all she could feel was rage. Why? Her voice cracked, hoarse from the confusion and the pain. Why, Julian? Why did you leave me? Julian flinched, the guilt flashing across his face. He stepped toward her, but Nevaeh raised her hand, stopping him in his tracks. You left me, without a word, no explanation, no apology. You just disappeared. And now you walk back into my life like nothing happened. Her voice shook, but she pressed on, the years of unanswered questions and silent grief pouring out. What was I to you, Julian? Nothing? He opened his mouth to speak, but the words felt stuck. His chest tightened. I'm sorry, he finally whispered, the words coming out broken. I was selfish. I was wrong, and I hurt you. I didn't fight for us. I didn't fight for you. The apology hung in the air between them, but Nevaeh's heart hardened. It wasn't enough, not after everything. She stared at him, her eyes sharp and unforgiving. You have no idea what you've done! Julian's throat tightened as he looked at her, knowing that the road to forgiveness was long, maybe even impossible. But all he could do now was listen. Nevaeh's pain, her anger. It was a tidal wave, and Julian knew he had no right to ask for her forgiveness. But for the first time in years, he was willing to fight for something that mattered. The machines in Lucy's room beeped erratically, their rhythm now a chaotic reminder of just how fragile her condition was. Julian stood by the window, his eyes fixed on her tiny form, his heart hammering in his chest. He had done everything he could. The bone marrow transplant was a gamble, one that had barely begun to show signs of hope, but Lucy was slipping. Her breathing was shallow, her color pale, and Julian could see the life draining from her, bit by bit. He clenched his fists, the weight of the guilt suffocating him. Had he waited too long? Nevaeh's eyes were red from the tears she had shed earlier, her body still weak from the accident, but her gaze never left Lucy. She sat beside the bed, her hand gently holding Lucy's, her face a mix of fear and love. The woman who had carried their daughter for months, who had fought for her life in ways Julian couldn't even begin to imagine, now looked at their daughter like she was slipping through her fingers. We need a miracle, Nevaeh whispered, her voice hoarse. Julian's heart broke as he watched her, seeing the years of pain and loss etched in her expression. For the first time since walking into that hospital room, he felt completely powerless. No amount of money, no amount of business success could undo the damage he had caused. All he could do now was wait and hope that his daughter would fight. As Nevaeh looked up at him, their eyes met. The silence between them was thick, filled with years of unresolved emotions. "I never wanted this for her, Julian," Nevaeh said quietly. "I never wanted her to have a life without you." Julian felt the weight of her words sink into him. She wasn't just talking about Lucy. She was talking about herself, about the years she had spent raising their child alone, without him. "I'm sorry, Nevaeh," he said, the words falling from his lips like stones. "I never should have left. I should have been here for you both. I can't change the past, but I'm here now." Nevaeh's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. There was a softening in her gaze, a crack in the armor she had built to protect herself from him. She didn't forgive him, not yet, but she saw his sincerity. She saw the man who had once loved her, standing before her, finally ready to take responsibility. Nevaeh's mind raced as she weighed her options. She could push him away, keep him at arm's length, as she had done for the past 2 years. It would be easier. But Lucy needed both of them. And somewhere, deep inside, she still cared. Her heart ached with the weight of her decision. She had spent so long protecting herself from the hurt Julian had caused, but the love she had for him and for their daughter was undeniable. She exhaled slowly. "You can stay for her." This story isn't over yet, and trust me, it's about to get even more intense. If you've been with us so far, you know you're not going to want to miss what happens next. Hit subscribe now. The days following Lucy's transplant were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Julian didn't leave the hospital, staying by Lucy's side every moment, watching as her fragile body fought for survival. The machines that once beeped in constant distress began to slow down, their rhythmic pulse a sign that she was holding on, that she was winning the battle. By the time Nevaeh was able to walk again, her body still healing from the accident, the news came. Lucy's condition had stabilized. The transplant had worked. Julian sat beside Lucy's bed, holding her small hand, watching her chest rise and fall in shallow breaths. He could hardly believe it. The child he had never known he had, his daughter, was going to survive. He had been a part of that miracle. Nevaeh stood in the doorway, her eyes soft with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The years of pain, the heartbreak, the loss, all seemed to dissolve in the presence of their daughter's recovery. She had fought so hard to give Lucy everything, and now, for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope, the smallest ember of possibility that their family, broken as it had been, might heal. Julian glanced up, his eyes meeting Nevaeh's. Neither of them spoke immediately. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. There was no more anger, no more resentment, just the quiet understanding of two people who had been through hell and back for the sake of their daughter. "I don't deserve this," Julian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Nevaeh shook her head, stepping closer. "You're here now," she said softly. "That's all that matters." He nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude and remorse. He had no illusions that everything was fixed. There were scars that couldn't be erased, words that couldn't be taken back. But for the first time, Julian felt like he could finally breathe again, knowing that Lucy was going to be okay. The days grew longer, but for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of peace. Julian and Nevaeh were rebuilding, cautiously, step by step. They didn't know what the future held. Maybe their relationship would remain fractured, maybe it would heal. But the one thing they both knew for certain was that they would fight for their daughter, together. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy. But they were willing to try, to start fresh, and in that, there was hope. There's no going back now. We've witnessed redemption, healing, and the power of forgiveness. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to get more stories like this. I believe in the power of storytelling, and your support means everything. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.